Welcome to Mom and Mind, a podcast about maternal mental health from conception, pregnancy, to birth and postpartum. Real stories from moms and family members who've made it from struggling to wellness, and interviews with experts and advocates who work for moms and families to get the help they need. We discuss very real struggles that can sometimes be hard to hear, but these are stories that need to be told so that moms and families can know that healing is possible. This podcast is meant to offer information and awareness and is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Thank you for being with us today. Welcome back to Mom and Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. We welcome you to this episode in honor of NICU Awareness Month in September. We are going to be talking with Fawn McCool, who is a licensed clinical social worker based in Portland, Oregon. She's going to be talking a little bit about her own experience as a parent through the NICU and the work she is doing now to support other parents through the NICU experience to make sure that they have the support that they need. We're going to touch on a couple of topics. What are the common stressors of having a baby in the NICU? What is it like to be in that environment and go home with a baby who's been in the NICU for a little while? And also, what are some of the common strengths and resilience that she sees from parents who've been through this experience? And of course, we hope to get you some information on how we can better support parents and children who are going through this experience. A little bit more about Fawn. Her professional credentials include certification in Interpersonal Neurobiology through Portland State University and MamaCare certificate through Shoshana Center. She is the creator of Interpersonal Neurobiology of Perinatal Mood Disorders and Birth Trauma, an online training for professionals that explores the impact and practices of attachment and bonding, including development and interventions for families affected by perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and birth trauma. She offers clinical therapeutic services through Aiyana Counseling. She also sits on the board of NICU Families Northwest, as well as volunteers with Baby Blues Connection. She is the mother of 2 girls. The first, who was born when Fawn was 29 weeks pregnant. After 8 weeks in a Southern California NICU, Fawn vowed she would work tirelessly to change the mental health outcomes of NICU parents nationwide through advocacy and education. So let's meet Fawn. Welcome, Fawn. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be on today.
Yeah, I'm really happy to talk with you about NICU families. It's one of these topics that I've been trying to get covered here, and you were gracious enough to offer your time to really give us some information and advocate for NICU parents, and I'm so happy that you're doing this with us.
I'm like, talk to me. I'll tell you all about my trauma in the NICU.
Okay. Yeah. Well, right. I mean, that's part of it, is being open to sharing. And not everyone is open. Not everyone needs to share. But I think it really does highlight what it's like, but also that, it's just so nice to hear that people can recover from things that feel like they would be very hard to recover from or work through.
Well, and I'm a work in progress. I'm still in recovery.
Sure.
And honestly, I just am so grateful to this maternal mental health world that we're in, that there are other therapists and mental health professionals that are willing to say, no, I had this too, and that's why I do this work.
Right.
Because I feel like as therapists, sometimes, you're kind of have this feeling like, I shouldn't, don't tell people what you've experienced, or it, it'll make you seem like you can't do your work. So I'm grateful to this community for being so open and welcoming for that.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. I feel like, again, you don't have to share your story, but if you've been through something, I think it deepens our compassion for what other people are going through.
100%.
Yeah. So please do start wherever you feel comfortable in terms of your story and how you came to be in this work.
Yeah. So at the time I was pregnant with my first, living in Los Angeles, and I was working for Child Protective Services. So working in a high stress job to begin with, already like so much secondary trauma. At 28 weeks, we were in Portland, Oregon, which is where we're going to move and have this baby, have a water birth, unmedicated water birth. And so we were here signing our lease, and I stopped feeling her kick. And it just, something felt wrong. I could immediately sense that something was off, and, got back to LA, saw my OB, and he's like, maybe she's just tired out of room. Did an ultrasound, was like, oh, it looks Like, she's got tons of room. She's probably just tired. She was too young to respond to that, the little buzzer test. So he sent me home on bed rest. I knew something was wrong. Like, I immediately got to this place of just, like, it felt like depression. Like, I felt like I was losing my baby. I was just, went home in bed rest. I just started crying uncontrollably. And then I looked on the internet and someone was like talking about how, their doctor sent them home and they had a stillborn. And I was just like, I knew it was wrong. And so I called my doctor and I was like, something is wrong. Like, something's wrong. And he's like, okay, let me get you in to see a specialist. Okay, well, so I'm waiting for the specialist appointment to come through. And I called him up. I think it was maybe even the next day. The timeline gets a little funky because, trauma. And then so his secretary was so rude. And she's like, we are waiting for an off from your insurance company. We will call you when it's ready. Day just went on. And this is the moment in my story where I'm like, thank God I am such a pushy broad. Like, thank God my mom, like, that I was born with this personality. And then my mom, like, always taught me how to, like, advocate and stand up for myself and never take anything. Because otherwise, I'm like, okay, doctor, whatever you say. And my baby would have died, And so finally I called up and I was like, listen, I'm checking myself into the hospital if I don't get in to see the specialist. And I called the specialist. I was like, I'm checking myself into the hospital if you don't get me in. And he's like, fine, your insurance hasn't cleared. So you bring $500 in cash and we'll give you the last appointment of the day.
What?
And I think these details are really important because part of post-traumatic stress disorder is when you don't have faith in the medical community that's working with you. And so that is one of the major, one of the things that can, result in some major mental health issues in the NICU. And so that's why I'm like, this is part of my story because it's like, obviously the ball is being dropped. Like, I'm not feeling safe or heard or taken care of or supported. So I have my $500 and I called my husband and I was like, come with me because something just doesn't feel right. So I pick him up from the bus stop and we go to the specialist and everything was looking fine. And then sure enough, there's, what is it called? Reverse blood flow. She's not getting the oxygen or the nutrients that she needs to survive. And he's like, you go straight to the hospital right now and I will meet you there. And I will call your OB and he will meet you there because more than likely you'll be delivering this baby now. And we're going to do a stress test. If she's in distress, you will not have time for the steroid shot to the lungs. And that lowers her survival rate. You need to be prepared that you might not be able to have this baby. So I get to the hospital. She's in distress. And they're like, yeah, you're C-section immediately. I mean, they just started shaving me, which felt, again, it's like when things are not being explained to you and your body is just kind of like being touched without permission, no one told me that you're going to be shaving me for the C-section. I know that sounds so silly to some people, but I was not prepared for this. No. I'm having a water birth in Portland, Oregon, unmedicated, don't forget. So doula in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
I was like, what is happening? And that was it. No time for the steroid shot. I was told she had a 50% chance of survival, and she was born the day she turned 29 weeks.
Wow.
And I was terrified. And I remember having her, and the neonatal doctor at the time held her up to my face and said, here's your baby. She's not healthy, but she's here. She's alive. Kiss your baby because I'm going to take her right now and she's going to need some work in the NICU and you'll see her there soon. And so I remember she held her up to my head and I kissed her head over and over. I just couldn't stop kissing her head. I was I remember just so shocked, so in love. And then they took her and I sent my husband with her because I was just so scared and didn't want her to be alone. And I was just uncontrollably sobbing. And I remember the anesthesiologist was like, give her something, or I'm going to give her something. Like, she's too worked up, too upset, And I remember thinking in that moment, like, are you kidding me? Like, my baby might live and you're like, I don't know. It felt like a judgment. It probably wasn't. It was probably just like her blood pressure is skyrocketing. Who knows? But in that moment, it was like, are you judging me right now? Anyway, and then they knocked me out with a bunch of jugs.
Wow. Again, not really asking you.
No, like there was no moment in any of this in which it was like, I felt like anybody gave a what about me. Mm-hmm. It was from the jump about keeping the baby alive, which is great, but also something I'll speak to later, that mother's mental health should be at the forefront of all these decisions as well. And if it's not, then you are not going to have a healthy baby either, ultimately. Right. So, and that's the thing in the NICU. It's like nothing comes before this baby, and that's important. It's so important to keep the baby alive. I'm not saying it's not, but it's also, what about this mom, you know,
right.
who just had this intense thing happen that's so different from what she thought, and no birthing classes, no preparation, no nothing, you know, and is told that her daughter has a 50% chance of living.
Yeah, that's
it's crazy.
Incredibly intense.
Incredibly intense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then I couldn't even go to the NICU until I could walk across the room. Those were the rules. So she was in the NICU, I was in recovery, and they would not let me even see her until I could get out of bed and walk across the room after having a C-section.
Right. That's ridiculous.
It's like,
ridiculous.
How are you kidding me? You're going to keep my baby from me? And again, I'll get into what that does to a person.
Yeah. Yes.
Physically.
Right.
But like, I remember walking across the room in total pain, just like taking all the drugs I could, because I was like, I just need to walk across this room and then just collapse into a wheelchair. It'll be fine. Because I would do anything to see this baby, you know, like, so I walked across the room like right away after having a C-section.
Yeah, right. There are so many levels of just not cool about this. I have heard other people describe this scenario, and it sounds like a common practice that just makes zero sense.
Again, it's like the reasoning, well, we have to protect the babies. We can't have you collapse in there. And it's like, okay, but I'm going in a wheelchair anyway. Mm-hmm. Don't keep me from my baby.
Right.
And it was this is kind of like being jumped into the NICU, because it's a control. It feels so power and control. Mm-hmm. We're in charge. All your parenting instincts, all those maternal instincts, out the window, because we're in charge now. We will tell you what's best for your baby. You don't tell us. And it's so funny. I listened to your other podcast with the gal who lost her baby in the NICU a couple weeks ago. The podcast was on, and her experience was so different. She felt so, and I always remind myself that is an experience in the NICU that people can have. They can have these really like these experiences in which they feel held and they trusted the doctors. But, you know, I'm like literally it's not even 48 hours since I've had to fight to get this baby even like looked at and taken seriously, like my issues taken seriously. And so no trust, there's no trust there, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm now hypervigilant to that, to noticing all the ways that they're not taking care of us or her. So, but anyway, it's kind of like being jumped in. It's like, okay, here's the rules, you know?
When you enter
we'll tell you when you want to hold her.
Right. Yeah. So they're telling you, that's what you're saying. There's all the instincts, all the things you want to do. You have to refrain from all of that and just follow directions.
Exactly. Exactly. Because it's like from the get-go, you're like, I want to hold my baby. And you can't even visit them until you walk across the room. You know that you should not be walking across the room. You just had a major surgery. You could fall because you're high out of your mind.
Right.
Like, I mean, this is not a moment to be like walking across the room, but you know that you have to see your baby. Those are your maternal instincts.
Yeah.
And so you're just going to do this thing that is so wrong, like it's just against, but it's your rules. They're in charge, and it continues, right? With when the baby gets changed, the diaper changes, when you can hold your baby, how you can hold your baby. There are all these rules. And it's like throughout my NICU experience, I had to fight to hold her, like constantly beg and plead. And they would say, no, do you know how many calories it takes to keep them warm, like they're not taking enough in, and you're going to keep them like their body temperature, it's going to set her back. I mean, it always felt to me like a fight in there to just do what I knew was right for her.
Mm-hmm. Right. You had a lot to deal with. Just you yourself are in a fragile and compromised state, trying to get in and see your daughter, who's, I'm assuming, also in a fragile state, and just trying to get connected to her. And
exactly.
There's lots of stuff in the way of doing that. Right.
Yeah,
a lot of people regulating everything.
Right. A system, right? There's this regulating system in place that you're constantly butting heads with. Yeah.
Right. So I guess I have some questions. So I think the prevailing idea is that like all of the measures that they're taking in the NICU are to, like you said, protect the baby, make sure the baby stays alive. And that's what was happening during your process, the birthing process. But you're saying, well, what about the mom? What about the parents who are involved here? What's being taken into consideration there? And I think every time I hear a story similar to this is that the medical part is so paramount, or at least it seems to be so paramount, that those other needs just aren't taken into consideration. I'm assuming, depending on the NICU, depending on what their policies are, that they're doing their job, and their job is to support the baby, and it's not necessarily to support the parents.
Right. 100%. I just think we don't support, we don't think of mothers and fathers' mental health in general in labor and delivery, but certainly in the NICU, you are taking a back seat, and no one is trained in there about mental health for parents. I mean, the social workers are so spread thin, and oftentimes they're so inundated with just doing, helping parents like learn around filing for disability and do you want to stay at the Ronald McDonald House? I mean, I know in Oregon, we have so many families that are coming from rural communities where there aren't NICUs, and there's just one social worker for all these families. But even the way the NICUs are set up, I mean, some NICUs do have individual rooms. We have quite a few here in Portland that do. My NICU did not. You're in this room. So I enter this room after walking across my recovery room, and there's like 20 babies in there. Wow. And that, if you think about the way a NICU is, I don't know if you've ever been in one, but it's 21 to like 3-4 pound babies, all in isolates, all with their own monitors, beeping constantly. These lights, the lighting that's not good for you. It's noisy. There's nurses everywhere. There's equipment everywhere. It's incredibly overwhelming. Now imagine being a new mom, not being able to even hold your baby to your skin. And that's how you're attaching for the first time. Right. For so long, it was like my body didn't even make her. I felt like she was just created in this isolate. It was so hard to even just imagine that she came out of me. Sometimes I still struggle with that 6 years later.
Well, that makes sense to me, because you were sort of having to just deal with the emergency situation, and how really mindful can you be during an emergency where you just go into this kind of hyper vigilant, hyper drive of, okay, save the baby. And you sort of have to disconnect a little bit from the experience in order to cope. Like you just can't be fully aware of everything that's going on, because you can't. Right. Exactly. And you're describing a really traumatizing situation through the whole process.
It was crazy. And then you're in this room packed with people, and it's just after this horrific traumatic situation, and trying to come down and be mindful in a place like that. Yeah. Like, I mean, it creates more hypervigilance, right? Yeah. And eventually, I mean, I was losing it. Like, I would notice people not washing their hands for the full minute before you came into the room. And I would be like, you didn't wash your hands. Nurse, they didn't wash their hands. Like it was like full on crazy town. Like I was like, this person is, because in my head, those intrusive thoughts were, this is the person that's going to bring in the flu that kills my baby. Right? Because everything, like you're just surrounded by people coming in and out, and babies at different stages, right? Like not all babies are 2-pound babies. Mine was 2 pounds, 2 ounces. Some are smaller, but a lot are bigger, you know? And a lot of parents handle this differently. Some people were expecting the NICU with twins, and so they're coming in and they're joyful, and you're just surrounded by all this, and it was so overwhelming. And eventually I was moved to a room where there were just 6 isolates. I didn't realize that half the room, it was so small because half the room was diagnosed with MRSA. Thank God I didn't know that, or I would have lost my mind. But this is the room in which I felt like I could actually bond with my baby and heal because
there was less stimulation. Right. Yeah.
Less stimulation. Yeah. I actually got to know the other people in that room. They were more long-term. So felt like we were in it together. Yeah. You know, one of the other parents captured the first time, like I have a picture of the first time, like I got to hold her in what I thought was skin to skin time because nobody explained to me that it was not over your nursing bra. Like you take off your shirt, but you know, and teach me how to do that. Yeah. It was a different experience when it was quieter and smaller groups. And yeah.
So how long were you in this process? How long was your daughter in the NICU? And
yeah, she was in there for 8 weeks, 8 full weeks. And in this time, I think I told you we were signing our lease in Oregon, so we had to move out of our LA apartment. And so we were homeless, sort of. Our home was in Portland, but our baby was in LA. And so you're from California, so you'll understand a friend of ours offered a room in her house to my husband and our awful cat that would pee on things. So, I mean, that is a friend, right?
Right.
And so she offered us, because we couldn't stay in the Ronald McDonald with this evil cat, and that I couldn't get rid of and still have and love to this day. But oh my gosh, when you're postpartum, there's something about your animals that just makes you think evil thoughts. So I was commuting from Santa Monica to Pasadena every day to see her.
That's quite a distance.
Yeah. And it was intense. Yeah. And there were moments where I'd be in traffic for hours trying to get to her. And so, not knowing how I'd find her. And
right. So that's a lot. And I'm sure there are so many other facets to your story and your experience and the move and all of this. I'm assuming that this experience for you really kind of pushed you into making sure that other parents don't experience this or trying to support them through it.
Totally. So then she was released from the hospital, 4 pounds after 8 weeks, and we were moving to Oregon. So we took this 4-pound baby and we left the hospital and started on our way to Oregon. And one of my dearest friends in the whole wide world came down and actually sat in the car with me because I was so scared to be alone with a newborn without monitors or anything and make this journey in a car to Portland. So then we moved here, and then it was like, I could not take my eyes off her the entire car ride. I just remember like looking at her and being like, I just can't I'm just so in love with her. Like, but also just so scared and hypervigilant and traumatized. And then we moved to Portland, and I had to quit my job because she was medically fragile. She couldn't be in a daycare, and as many NICU families experience. And for those of us that have the privilege, like the means to do that, that is like the greatest privilege in the world. So, you know, but then it was just the isolation and just being like a mental health professional that could not figure out what just hit her and the shame of that, of dealing with that, and the nightmares and the flashbacks and just not knowing what was going on with me for 2 years until I saw someone who was like, you have post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was like, you mean the thing that only veterans get? What?
Right.
You know, as many NICU families say. And it was like, well, yeah, you're having all the signs. And I was like, how did I not notice that? And
because you don't. You're in it. When you're in it, it's really hard to see.
Because trauma, right? Like you're just walking around like, just crazed out of your mind. And so, yes, it was when I was on my healing journey, after finally somebody giving me something to, like a diagnosis, which I'm not into pathologizing, but it named it to tame it, right? Like, I feel like that's exactly what it did. And I was able to figure out what was going on and really start working on learning how to regulate myself. And then I took this certification in interpersonal neurobiology, and that really resonated with me. Just the physical changes that the NICU had on my brain and my nervous system, and really helped me to understand what I went through physically, why I was putting on like 40 pounds in the course of 8 weeks in the NICU, and why I was like, physically like not being able to regulate myself. And it was that series of classes that really kind of gave me the push to really focus on educating this NICU community about what's happening in their bodies, but also just like all the changes that we could be making to better serve these families so that they're not leaving with PTSD diagnosis, because that is ridiculous and preventable. It's 100% preventable.
Are you seeing that is a really common experience?
Like having a PTSD diagnosis? Well, 15% of moms are leaving a NICU at 30 days with post-traumatic stress disorder, and 8% of dads. Yeah. And then an additional 11.7% of mothers and 4% of fathers with symptoms of PTSD. So yes, that is, and then common. Depressive symptoms, up to 63% of NICU moms are just displaying depressive symptoms 3 to 5 days after the NICU admit. So it's high, way high. Right. And it doesn't need to be.
Right. No. I mean, I'm thinking of all the ways that this could be prevented a lot. There are a lot of ways that this could be prevented, or at least not as intense if possible, which like maybe require a whole other separate podcast to go into all of those details because it's a lot.
Or they could just take my class.
Right. They can take your class. So I want to get into just a little bit of you said some of the common stressors you listed in your own experience of having a baby in the NICU is all the worry, the concern, things being out of your control.
Number one, separation from baby, right? Or even the briefest separation from a baby is going to result in a measurable HPA response, right? Across all social species. Like, this isn't just humans. Like, you separate, I think all the studies that have been done with mamas and rats, their baby pups have been, like, mama rats and their pups have been separated, and they've measured the endorphin levels. They have dangerously high decline in endorphin levels, huge HPA responses. So it's not, the physical changes that your body is going through just in the briefest separation is huge.
Right. Incredible stress.
Because parents need to be able to see, hold, and touch their newborn. That is how attachment and bonding happens, right?
Yeah.
And during these lengthy NICU stays, this isn't happening. There's so much separation that happens.
Right. And from what you said, I don't know all of the medical reasons for that, but there are some. But that can be, I think from what you're describing, that can and should be mediated in a different way so that people can attach and connect.
100%. And I think a lot of it is just the way the NICUs have been designed, right? It's just hospital, like rooms and stuff, right? Like when now the new NICUs, families can sleep in the rooms with their babies. That's huge. Right. I mean, the nightmares I would have when I would leave her every night, the tears, leaving her every night, I would just cry and cry. Like, I didn't want to leave her. Right. And now you can sleep in the NICU with your, basically live in that room with her, with, the preemies. So they're setting things up so that it's more family centered, but a lot of NICUs are not set up like that.
Right. So all of these effects, there's potential for PTSD. There's difficulty with attachment or bonding because you literally can't hold them very often.
Well, and just not even just in the mom. Like, I love this quote by Cosolino. He says, giving an infant non-sedating morphine has the same soothing effect on the separated infant as the reappearance of the mother. Like, that is how calming it is to have your mom with you, right?
Like taking morphine.
Like taking morphine, and vice versa, because our nervous systems mirror each other, right? And so I can only imagine that it would be the same on the mother. And that is how intense. I mean, I'm kind of like harping on this for a while, but that is just how intense it is to be separated from your baby for any length of time, you know? But yeah,
right.
so like...
These are effects that are happening both in the NICU, but I just keep thinking of, okay, well, your trip home was probably not the most common trip home from a NICU, but still there's that anxiety. There's the, oh my gosh, they're not on all of the supportive stuff. I got to figure out how to do this on my own now.
Oh, totally.
And
yeah,
then,
the after stuff was intense. Well, she was our first too, because other parents in the NICU were talking about balancing family life, right? We have siblings at home, and during cold and flu season, sibling visits are limited, right? Not everyone lives near a NICU either, so you could be driving hours. And if you have other kids at home, that really limits the amount of time that you get to be with that baby.
Right.
There's financial stress when you're in the NICU, and so a lot of people have to face am I going to take my maternity or paternity leave now, or save it for when they're home? Or do I have to quit my job? And not to mention, I had a lead nurse that used to call my nugget the $1 million baby. She would say they're all $1 million babies. I was like, what the heck is she talking about?
Yeah.
And then I got the bill, and it was $1 million bill.
No.
And so, yes. Oh, yes. So the financial stress is intense. Like, they're not
expecting you to pay $1 million.
No, it was covered by insurance for me. I had great county insurance. But for a lot of people, they are having to pay quite a bit, right?
Yeah. I know. That's just...
So there is that financial stress. And then afterwards, again, it's like, do I have to quit my job now because the baby can't be, and a lot of parents are leaving. My nugget, we were so lucky she didn't have to leave on oxygen or a feeding tube, no G-tubes. But like a lot of people are coming home with medical equipment and trying to find someone that can care for a baby with medical equipment. And returning to work is just not a possibility. So much financial stress. And again, it's just that loss of parental autonomy. You're basically taught how to care for your baby in the NICU way. Some people this can feel really comforting. But then when you get home,
regimented, right?
Very regimented, right? Which really leans into that hypervigilance. That can really exacerbate.
Yeah.
But also when you leave and you no longer have that, you're kind of lost, without a nurse telling you what to do and when to do it.
Right.
I'm a white woman, right? I'm not even a person of color in the medical environment. So imagine being a person of color in this medical environment. And if your experience has been safe, what your experience with doctors are like. All my neonatologists were all white, no people of color on staff. So there's that piece too, because there's a huge portion of the NICU that are babies of color, right? And so that's probably a whole nother podcast as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As its own episode, for sure. I'm just thinking this is an incredible amount of stress during a massive life change, and where things are all very, vulnerable and precarious, and, and you're not really sure what this path is going to look like. You're taking things day by day because that's the only thing you can do. On some level, maybe worried about the future, but it sounds like there's often not, well, this is what's going to happen. It's more like, well, it's going to be like tomorrow. Which is... That's
parenting too, in a way, right?
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
But even more so with a NICU baby, you never know if you show up and your baby has had a turn for the worse, they're going to make it. I remember coming in one day feeling really good about her progress and how she was doing, and that lead nurse, I called her $1 million baby, said to me, you really shouldn't get your hopes up. Babies dying here all the time.
Oh my gosh.
And then started to talk about a book she read written by a dad.
No, just
baby. I mean, I'm telling you, it's like I couldn't even make this stuff up.
I mean, this should be like 101 basic kind of training, things not to say to parents who have babies in the NICU. Right.
But now that I'm out of it, that's her trauma, right?
Sure.
Can you imagine telling a parent that their baby died Or being a nurse and getting to know this baby for months. These babies can be in there for months and then have it pass. Like,
yeah, I mean, you're speaking to multiple levels of stuff. Yes, they need to be getting more support too. The system isn't set up to support them either. There are so many issues here.
Totally.
So many. And it's so nice that you can step back and see that that's her trauma. And also, right, you're speaking to a systemic issue that
100%
affects people for months, years. Potentially. Yeah.
Years. I had a flashback the other day and was like, really? Still?
Right.
Yeah. Years.
So, I mean, what strikes me about it though, like with your story and all parents who deal with this, is you can't get through this without some sort of strength, without some sort of resilience, without some sort of drive. I'm curious about what you see in terms of that. Like, what gets people through this?
I think that, so have you heard of Wilma Rudolph? She's a gold medal winning Olympian in track and field. She was a preemie, born in, I think, the 50s or 60s. I'm sorry, I should know that. But she was born at 4.5 pounds in a rural part of the South. And she was also an infant polio survivor. So she had infant paralysis. And there's this quote that she says that said, "My doctor told me I would never walk again. My mother told me I would. And I believed my mother." And that's what, as a preemie parent, you know what your kids are capable of. You've literally watched this child like grow from someone that, like a being that you would hold in one hand with tubes and wires everywhere, and you've watched them beat the odds. And preemie parents are told of everything that could go wrong with them at all times, right? 50% survival. They'll most likely have ADD, most likely have this. And just every year they grow, they just beat the odds. And you'll always tell your child that they'll walk again because you know that they will. I reached out to this group of NICU families in Portland and asked them, like, what are some of the strengths that we all possess? Like, what is special to being a NICU parent? And one person wrote that the size of the body does not reflect the size of the spirit.
Whoa,
and I think that we have this, and another person wrote, we have this drive and determination and stamina, and we've learned that we can make it through anything. Resilience, for sure.
Right.
And so that's just the preemie way. And I think there's also something kind of beautiful about being a preemie parent. You really learn to focus on the individuality of the child. They're never going to be like their peers, and that's okay. And then every milestone is hugely celebrated, right? And you learn to just not compare yourself to anyone else, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And that you always just see your baby for who they are, because they will always be that way, right? Another woman wrote the realization that I can't control everything, and someone else echoed that they thought it made you more realistic. And no matter how much you try and do the right thing, you cannot control outcomes. And I think that's super true. It helps you to kind of go with the flow a little bit more, and just see what may come. And because you believe in your child so fiercely.
Right. That's beautiful. And thank you for speaking to that, because I mean, this is really incredibly difficult, to say the least, to go through. And then people who are kind of facing this as like a possibility that their child will be in the NICU, or unsure that their child sort of ends up there for however long. It's hard to know how you're going to get through something like that. And to hear from you and from the other people that do get through and find your way through and then find strength from it too, is just, I think it at least kind of hopefully gives some sort of comfort or hope for people who are dealing with it.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's so much hope out there. And there's strength in numbers, because you're not alone. And that's the biggest thing. You're not alone.
Right.
And you have someone that can be there with you through it and remind you that to believe in your child, because look at all they've done.
Right. That's beautiful. So I'm sure there's a very long list of ways we can better support parents. Can you give us a glimpse at that?
Yeah. Well, number one, I love this Bonnie Badenoch quote. She says, trauma is a relational experience and arises more from our sense of being alone with pain and fear than more from the event itself. And so what that says to me is, don't be alone. We need to have more peer support set up in the NICUs and counselors readily available. 100%, so much more advocacy for change in the NICU environment to support zero separation, for attachment and bonding to thrive, and some psychoeducation on the effects of trauma on the brain and nervous system, right? And then supporting neuroplasticity, supporting your brain's ability to grow by developing programs like peer support groups, walking yoga for trauma, mindfulness workshops, massage events, teaching parents how to give their child massages. You know, preemies are usually they're not born with completely functioning like vagal systems, but studies show that infant massage includes it's actually been attributed to weight gain in preemies and better vagal tone. And also massage for parents, massage, peer support, and psychoeducation and connections to mental health. The most important thing we can do, though, is to prioritize women's health. It's the most important factor in determining the quality of the mother-offspring interaction. It's the mental and physical health of the mother. That's true for all animals, rats, monkeys, humans. Studies show it. Why we are not prioritizing this in the NICU is beyond me.
Right.
So that is my short list. And if you'd like more, I have a class that dives really deeply into what happens in the brain and the nervous system when we are experiencing birth trauma, and not just even birth trauma, but depression and anxiety, and how relationships can really change our brains and our bodies and help us get out of this.
And what's
without
the class?
Diagnoses. It's Interpersonal Neurobiology of Perinatal Mood Disorders and Birth Trauma.
Oh, cool. Where can people find that?
Yeah, check my website, which is fawnmccool.com, FAWNMCCOOL.com, and I will have things posted on there. It was previously taught through the PCC Climb Center, and I think I'm going to transition into teaching it through my own website soon. So,
okay, great.
Yeah, so and you can always sign up for information there. But yeah, it's so much, and I feel like all this experience has taught me is that these are easy changes. I'm not asking for anything huge here. You know, I think these are very easy things that we can change, and that we could really change the outcome of maternal mental health in the NICU with just a few things.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, getting some things better doesn't mean we have to overhaul the entire system, but systemic changes obviously would be helpful. I mean, to your point, just giving people the information they need so that they can understand what's going on for themselves is so empowering, because otherwise we're all in the dark about this. You can't know everything all the time about every experience you're going through, but certainly, like you're saying about women's health, and specifically about in this transition, all of the things that can happen. Oh gosh, just giving someone the information is so simple and so powerful that they don't have to be alone thinking that it's just them, or that they're the only people who've had this experience.
100%. And then we all know that our mental health and how we are affects our child, right? And preemies have super high rates of behavioral issues, attention deficit disorder. Not to say that this is because of a parent, but we regulate each other. We just do. I mean, I went to an OT session one day with my daughter, and who is a handful. And my OT looked at me and said, I notice when you come in and you're very anxious, your daughter's really anxious. Did you notice you were having that kind of impact? And at first I was like, you jerk. Don't blame me for her behavior. But then I was like, oh, yeah, she's right. I really need to get control over this. It's really changed my relationship with her, just knowing that. And so these are the types of things that like, we're not only impacting our mamas and our papas, but we're like impacting our kids and their outcomes.
Right. And I thank you for saying that, right? It's not about making blame. It's just understanding how we impact each other and how we can do that in positive ways. It's not about 100%. You're wrong or you did, whatever. All the ways in which we blame ourselves. Right. Yeah.
Right. Well, there's no shame or blame in this. It is just the way we are created. We are social beings, and we are created to mimic each other's arousal levels.
Right. Thank you so much, Fawn, for sharing your story and being vulnerable with us so that, we can really understand what it's like, especially for people who haven't had this experience, to understand for a moment what it might be like for a parent going and their child going through the NICU. And I appreciate you saying that this is your experience and other people may have some different experiences, but I think what you're describing is pretty common in terms of leaving with all of this stress and feeling all of this strain for a while. And it's just
100%.
There's so much healing, I think, for people who can identify with you, just hearing it out there and knowing that they're not alone. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And if you are in Portland, Oregon, I do practice in a group with women and men. We have an amazing male counselor as well who specializes in perinatal, working with dads.
Great.
At Aiyana Counseling. So we are here to help you through that here too. So, and yeah, your story does not have to be as crazy as mine to still have a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. Like, traumas are not comparable, right? Trauma is trauma.
Not at all.
And so I don't want anyone hearing all this, oh, well, she moved and she had this. And just to, sometimes we tend to minimize our experiences like it's not as bad, but that's not the case.
Right.
Any experience with the NICU is a trauma. And to just know that.
Right. Well, thank you for shedding light on this for us. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you for this work you do. I am so appreciative for all the things I've learned from your podcast. I love it.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm so happy to be doing it. Thank you again for this really important discussion. I'm so glad to be bringing this to the forefront. And if you guys would like to get connected with Fawn, you can find her at fawnmccool.com or follow her on Facebook, Fawn McCool LCSW. And as usual, if you're just joining us and you have not yet subscribed to the Mom and Mind podcast, go to your favorite listening platform, click subscribe, and you'll be able to get every episode delivered straight to you each Monday when it comes out. We'd love for you to share this podcast and this information with anyone who you feel would benefit from it. And you can join us online at the Mom and Mind Connection Facebook page, on Instagram or Twitter. Thanks for being with us, and until next time. By joining us today, you are part of the growing community of people who are aware and concerned for mothers and families during this beautiful and sometimes very difficult time of life. If you or someone you know is having a hard time, help is available. You can feel better. Please look for resources for help at momandmind.com. Together, we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Thank you for listening and being a part of the Mom and Mind community.